This is Beijing's surrounding area right now, the worst flood in 60 years. And that's the 2022 Beijing Winter Olympics ski jump, the nearby river overflowing. Nearby towns are submerged and chaotic. Potentially hundreds of thousands are still stranded as we speak. How many died? Unknown. It's like a mini version of the movie 2012 happening in China right now. Meanwhile, Chinese propaganda is staging a video shoot on fake flood fighting. Watch. Now, where the heck is their massive military? Well, it's nowhere to be seen. And instead of helping with the flood effort, they're putting up panels to stop people from filming a collapsed bridge. Natural disasters like floods and earthquakes in China seem to go horribly wrong. So today I'll tell you why it always ends up in a man-made crisis situation, on repeat. Now, why does it seem like China cannot handle natural disasters? And is it always the fault of nature? Well, let's talk about it. Welcome to China Insider, I'm David Zhang. Now, before we get started, if you haven't subscribed to our channel already, we appreciate it as it will help us grow, and share this video if you enjoy the content, of course, but also comment below what your thoughts are on today's topic. Now, floods and other natural disasters in China seems to always start out as a natural event, but they're quickly exacerbated by the intervention that the Chinese regime often do. Like things like floods and earthquakes, they're actually major indicators of the CCP's bad management policies of society. Now, last time in our video, we covered the 2008 Wenchuan earthquake and how the tofu drag situation of poor construction of buildings could not withstand earthquakes, particularly school buildings. And that is very much a man-made crisis by corrupt officials working with evil contractors. Now, this time we will look at the flood situation and how China's existing anti-nature infrastructure mindset creates the constant flood problems in China. Now, for some background information, China has close to about 90,000 dams. That's more than any other country. And China's largest dams, they're used for irrigation and electrical generation. And that accounts for about 20% of the world's total large dams. The most famous, of course, you might know, is the Three Gorges Dam. China puts dams in places that, for the excuse, it will prevent floods by regulating water flow. But the reality is often the opposite. Dams really cause the majority of the flooding in China. Now, this is an area around the south of Beijing right now, and that's not from the rainfall alone. The historic rainfall this time around Beijing was just in the beginning. As more water accumulates upstream, though, it started to threaten the city area of Beijing. That's the capital of China. Now, politically, Beijing can never be flooded, right? This would actually be a big political issue for the CCP. Now, to solve this problem and save face for the Communist Party, the Water Ministry ordered flood water to be discharged. Now, that's from the upstream and higher elevation near Beijing into lower elevation areas downstream. And now, having dams allow for the management of where the water goes. And according to the Ministry of Water Resources, to ensure that Daxing Airport and a developmental area called Xiong'an, they're safe from flooding, dams must discharge water. Okay, now these two areas are actually tied to Chinese leader Xi Jinping's political image. So let's take a look at some maps. The Daxing Airport and the Xiong'an development area, they're here and here. Specifically, Xiong'an is just north of a lake area where normally water would end up here anyways, as many lakes and streams are connected to this lake. Eventually, it all ends up, of course, in the ocean. But the dumb idea is that they're trying to build a developmental economic area in the marsh. That idea itself is pretty anti-logical, right? You don't build something in the flood zone and expect it to be okay. But the issue is the CCP goes to the extreme and they try to protect it. The decision is to sacrifice a smaller town. Now, Zhuozhou here is situated south of Beijing. About 650,000 people live here. Of course, it's lower elevation, so water flows down. Suddenly, floodwater surged through Zhuozhou and its surrounding areas. Towns and villages instantly became flooded, and water, of course, in Zhuozhou reached something like 6 meters in depth. The city center, which is about the height of those traffic lights, but in other areas reached a height of 12 meters, and that's about 6 adults high. People are crying out for help, and we have many videos to show you. Many have been stranded for days, calling out that they have no food, water, access to power, or even other like cellular communication. In a rare moment, though, the CCP leader himself even admitted to the massive casualties sustained in this ongoing flood situation. But the irony is that just days before the flood in Beijing, Xi Jinping published his principles on flood management. Well, obviously it didn't work, and the reality is we don't know how many have died and how many more may be dying. But the situation is that 650,000 people are sacrificed to save those in the capital region. The doomed fate of those living in the area is to realize that when they wake up, their apartments have become islands and their single-story homes have been completely submerged. All of their farms and projects, or if they have any sort of storage in things, essentially all wiped out, washed away. Vehicles gone. Now, the CCP is using this area as what is considered a drainage pool for the floodwater to accumulate. In other words, they're basically saying this area is dead, and we're just going to keep it that way. We're going to flood the entire area until this whole event is over. But we know that it would take more than a month for the water to drain, and that means 650,000 people and more in the area are going to be living through hell for the next month or so. And that's, of course, if no more water comes to town. That means living in the discharge zone for the flood, becoming a sacrificial lamb for the CCP, protecting the bigger urban area seems to be the go-to decision-making for the Chinese Communist Party. Why? Well, it's actually very simple. It's because the CCP views human lives as expendable resources, and so with almost no warning, overnight the dams open their gate and allow a big surge of water downstream. Essentially, you instantly flood an area. And this has nothing to do with drainage itself, right? Because when you have so much water, you can't get rid of it. Now, some did say that they received a warning ahead of time, but they were only given a few hours. So how can you prepare to leave everything behind, taking and convincing your entire family to go with you? In fact, the CCP did this multiple times since July 29th. And a new video even shows local police attempting to dig out the riverbank, which allows for more water to flood into Zhuozhou. And so, of course, that's basically manually pushing the excess amount of water into the town. But that's not all. There's even worse parts than that. So stick with me. Discharging floodwater is just a short-term decision. It's supposed to try to remedy what's going on, right? But the core problem is how the CCP approaches the natural world. The Chinese Communist Party really believes in the struggle against all things, including against Mother Nature. So that's why they're fighting rivers by putting dams to manage them, and they're constantly destroying arable land and destroying soil it's an anti-nature decision-making process. So they don't really respect the natural world at all. Now, we know that the point of protecting nature is so that the natural world can help us in times like this. But Communist China doesn't believe it. They believe in putting nature in its place. So when you've done so much to damage the earth, the mountains, the rivers, can we really expect them to just not react violently when a natural disaster like a flood happens? Xi Jinping himself even introduced a strange idea called sponge city. Western media, of course, picked up the hype. It's supposed to be able to absorb water and release it when needed, right? The name sponge. Essentially, Beijing took an existing idea of water management that Western countries have used and put a new name on it. But with all things in China under the CCP, like tofu drag construction, it is doomed to fail. And because the CCP failed to create the basic infrastructure, the underground drainage system, because you can't see it, right? So you can't propagandize it, before adding on the sponge system on top, that the whole thing just collapsed. It's kind of like you're trying to build the second story of a house, saying that I don't need the first floor or the foundation. It doesn't work. So the idea is that since China has a drought season, they're just going to build a sponge system in Beijing and Zhuozhou, which is where the 2021 flood happened. And there's more megacities of sponge cities out there, but these two are the ones we'll focus on. So the sponge system really doesn't work against heavy rainfall, not without the foundational infrastructure of drainage to back it up. And that's what happened in 2021. The Zhuozhou flood was one of the worst cases of man-made crisis made possible by the ideas of sponge system as well as the poor decision-making of discharging dams. So on July 20th, 2021, the city of Zhengzhou, a historic level of rainfall was, of course, again, the starting factor. Heavy rainfall would cause problems in Zhengzhou. And CCP officials, because of political reasons, fear that their own careers would be on the line, decided to discharge the dams upstream, and which is what we saw in Beijing just now. So, and then overnight, the decision to discharge the floodwater downstream essentially suddenly increased the water level in the city. And meanwhile, Zhengzhou officials didn't want to cause panic publicly, and so they just told the public transportation system to continue to run. And that resulted in subway cars full of people drowning in water. In fact, Zhengzhou's sponge system cost more than $7 billion to build. So imagine that. You spend $7 billion on something that doesn't even work. In December 2013, Xi Jinping mentioned that through the construction of sponge cities, quote, 70% of the city's rainfall will be absorbed and utilized on site. And according to their official media, the report is that by the end of 2021, Beijing's citywide completion for Sponge City would reach a third, and that's about 5,200 sponge projects. And they claim that about 85% of the rainwater will be absorbed. Now, clearly, we saw that the situation in Beijing right now is it can barely manage anything. So it's really another tofu drag project. It's big promise, sad ending. Meanwhile, the same doomed fate happened to other areas in Beijing as well. In the mountainous area west of Beijing city center called Mengtougou, they jammed the signal to prevent communication with overseas people, to prevent people from sending videos so that people can see what's going on, because that would cause an embarrassing situation for the government. Mengtougou is also a part of that Sponge City project in Beijing. And as always with any tragedy in China, officials have kept the number of victims at this time and back in 2021 to a stunningly low amount. And so far, the officials claim 20 plus have died, and of course, since the flood took place around Beijing. Messages, though, and Excel spreadsheets that I was able to obtain show a very different story. There's at least thousands of entry in the Zhuozhou area south of Beijing alone. And that part has entries into these Excel sheets with some of them have, hundreds or thousands of people on there. Others have just one or two. But the point is, this is not, as the CCP described, to be such a small amount of people that have gone. And in Mengtougou, which is, again, west of Beijing, there's a message chat that says they saw 200 bodies, one as young as 4 years old. And in the aftermath, we know that the exact same formula will be used, which is the CCP will begin the propaganda process of celebrating the flood rescue. But in reality, it's more people that have been stranded, left to die, than those that were rescued. And the chapter will close with no one mentioning it anymore in the near future. And that's the story of modern man-made disasters in China. All right, that's it for today's episode of China Insider, which we discussed how the floods happen in China. If you enjoyed the content, leave a like and comment below. Also, subscribe to our channel to help us grow. As always, you can also follow me on other social media like Twitter and Instagram, where I post short videos on the most up-to-date news of the day on China. All right, that's it for today. Thanks for watching.